Allison, once your treatment is finished and you're discharged, please don't come back to my place. Go to your parents' home instead. When the day finally arrived for my breast cancer surgery, my husband Dylan coldly uttered these words to me. What? Why all of a sudden? What does this mean? Actually, I can no longer see you as a woman. That's why we can't continue as a couple. I want a divorce. Faced with these unexpected words, everything before my eyes darkened, and my mind went blank. However, it seems Dylan hasn't realized that by choosing to divorce, he will be the one losing everything. My name is Allison. I'm 28 years old and a full-time housewife. My husband's name is Dylan, and he's 34, older than me. We have been married for 3 years. Dylan works in sales at a general trading company and is expected to have a promising future as a young employee. Before we got married, I also worked at the same company as Dylan. I have always been good at math and majored in it in college, going on to graduate school. However, I couldn't pursue a career in research, feeling that it would be difficult to become a researcher as a woman. I gave up on that path and joined a general trading company. That's where I met Dylan, who would become my husband. Oh? Are you a new employee? Nice to meet you. Feel free to ask me anything if you're unsure. Dylan, assigned to the same department, greeted me warmly and kindly when I started working. Although it feels awkward to say this about myself, I was a finalist in a beauty contest during my student days, so I'm quite attractive. Being taller than average for a woman, I stood out among the new employees. Thank you so much. I look forward to working with you. I responded to Dylan, who had spoken to me, with a broad smile. Many men had approached me since my student days, but most of them were only interested in my looks and didn't listen to me seriously. So, I was used to just smiling politely to get through those interactions. However, there was something different about Dylan compared to other men I had met. Up until then, I had spent most of my time in the university lab, discussing with fellow students. As a result, I might not have had much knowledge about the real world. I often come off as flashy due to my appearance, but I'm actually shy and introverted. So, initiating conversations was challenging for me, and I struggled with interacting with new people. Allison. Are you seeing someone right now? Caught off guard by his question, I stammered, no, I'm not seeing anyone, feeling embarrassed. Dylan seemed surprised by my answer and showed an embarrassed smile. Really? Then, if it's okay with you, would you like to go out with me? I was deeply moved by Dylan's confession and nodded in agreement immediately. Honestly, it was the first time someone had asked me out so seriously, and I felt both joy and happiness at that moment. And so, my relationship with Dylan began. And we spent enjoyable times together at beautiful places and restaurants. For me, who rarely left the university campus, it was a series of new experiences. Then, around the time a year had passed, Dylan proposed to me during a birthday dinner. Happy birthday, Allison. Will you marry me? At that moment, I felt an overwhelming joy, as if I were in a dream scene from a TV drama. I accepted his proposal, ready to step into a new future. Allison, once we're married, I want you to quit your job and wait for me at home. That's the kind of family I want to have. Is that okay? Of course. If that's the kind of family you want, Dylan, I'm fine with it. I didn't originally find much fulfillment in my job at the company. I aspired to be a homemaker and thought I could spend my time reading, which I enjoyed. Afterward, Dylan and I visited each other's parents, and they were all delighted for our happiness. Especially my parents, who were overjoyed and supportive of our marriage. They must have thought it unlikely for me, a daughter who dressed plainly and immersed herself in hard-to-understand research at university, to get married. They must have been deeply moved when I brought home a fiancé. My parents' home is wealthy by any standard, owning several properties and land. They live off the rental income and never had to worry about living expenses. With financial ease, my parents run a cafe next to our home as a hobby. When we talked about marriage, my parents offered to build us a new house on a piece of land at a reasonable distance from their home as a wedding gift, insisting that we wouldn't need to pay. There was one condition, though. I am an only child, with no siblings. So, my parents wanted Dylan to take my family name. Dylan was surprised to learn that my family was wealthy with assets. And even more so when he heard about the gift of a new house. That was understandable. While our colleagues struggled with monthly mortgage payments, we were getting a new house without any financial contribution. Months passed, and we had our wedding. After returning from our honeymoon, we started our life in the new house. And I quit my job to become a full-time homemaker, as Dylan wished. I thought I'd have a lot of free time as a homemaker, but reality was different. I woke up early to prepare breakfast, and after sending off Dylan, my days were filled with chores. Dishes, laundry, gardening, there was so much to do. Just when I thought I was done, it was already time for lunch. Time flew, and I often found myself exhausted. I usually had simple meals alone, and then started cleaning the house. Maintaining a house required much more effort than I realized. Before I knew it, it was time to prepare dinner again. There was no chance for reading or enjoying my own time. Sometimes, I'd forget dinner preparations, and Dylan would get furious. Hey. I come home tired from work. And you haven't prepared dinner or a bath. What have you been doing? You're a homemaker, aren't you? I am a human being. Everyone has days when they feel sick or too tired to move as they want. Allison. I'm sorry about earlier. I went too far. Even after yelling, Dylan would turn affectionate at night, asking for intimacy. I'm tired today. Can we just sleep? I'd say, declining his advances. Dylan would get upset, making it troublesome to appease him afterward. Reluctantly, I would comply, but I just wanted to sleep peacefully. Married life felt harder than I thought, but I convinced myself that it was just how it was. Dylan's job was busy, with frequent overtime and business trips. On days when I was alone, I felt a mix of loneliness and relief. Then, in our second year of marriage, Dylan's behavior started to change noticeably. Even after yelling at me for not meeting his expectations, he used to become affectionate. But recently, he remained irritable and would retreat to the bedroom, reducing our communication. Despite his continued busy schedule with work, overtime, and trips, I felt something was different. In retrospect, Dylan might have started cheating around the time I began sensing something was off. So I boldly asked him, "You've been acting differently lately. Is something wrong?" Dylan, looking annoyed, just answered, "I've recently been put in charge of a new product project. Work is really busy. Can you just leave me alone for a bit?" Back then, I believed his words at face value. However, one night, Dylan returned home unusually early and sought intimacy after a long absence. At the time, I also hadn't been intimate for a while and was feeling frustrated. So I responded to Dylan's advances. "Huh? What's this? There's something here." While touching my breast, Dylan noticed something. I felt the same spot and found a hard lump in my left breast. It's true. There's something in my left breast. What is it? I hadn't noticed it until then because there was no pain or discomfort. The next day, driven by anxiety, I searched online for a nearby gynecologist. I found a well-regarded doctor in the neighborhood and decided to get examined. On the day of the examination, I entered the doctor's office feeling overwhelmed with anxiety. A kind-faced female doctor greeted me. "Hello. You must be anxious. But don't worry. Let's conduct a thorough examination. First, please undress your undergarments and lie down on your back with your shirt on. I did as the female doctor instructed and lay down on the examination table. She palpated my breast and conducted further tests, including a breast X-ray and mammography. After that, she took a blood sample and used a needle to collect a sample from the lump for a biopsy. The female doctor said after the examination, "Thank you for your patience. It was a lot of tests, wasn't it? I can't give you all the results today, but I'll contact you when they're ready." Despite her smiling face, I sensed a hint of sadness in her smile. That night, Dylan didn't come home. I wanted to talk to him about the examination. I spent the night alone, feeling anxious and lonely. The next day, when I asked Dylan why he hadn't come home the night before, he apologized. "I had urgent work and had to prepare some documents in a hurry. It was so sudden, and I forgot to contact you." Sorry. But he didn't seem to truly feel sorry. "So, how did the examination go?" Dylan's voice was kind, but it sounded indifferent, as if it were someone else's issue. "I don't know the results yet. They said they'll contact me. But from the doctor's tone, it doesn't seem good." Tears welled up in my eyes, overwhelmed with anxiety. I didn't know what to do anymore. "What? What does that mean?" "It's not good." Dylan said this without taking his eyes off his smartphone, even though we were discussing something serious. Seeing his indifferent attitude made me feel like he wasn't interested in me at all. As I watched him, tears started rolling down my cheeks. Dylan didn't even try to notice my tears, absorbed in messaging on his phone. I lay down on the bed, crying myself to sleep. When I woke up, the morning sun was shining into the room, but Dylan had already left. A few days later, I received the results of the examination. The call weighed heavily on my heart. I wanted to consult Dylan, but he hadn't returned since that day. With a heavy heart, I entered the doctor's office, where the female doctor awaited me with a solemn face. "Hello. How are you feeling? Please take a seat first. Let's discuss the results." I sat down as prompted by the female doctor. "The results suggest a possibility of breast cancer. We can't treat it here, so I'll write a referral to a larger hospital." "Do you have a preferred hospital?" The female doctor informed me of this. Though I had braced myself, hearing it directly left me shocked and speechless. "Well, if there's a good hospital, please." That was all I could muster to say. "All right. I'll refer you to this hospital," the female doctor suggested, proposing a large general hospital nearby. "Yes. That's fine. Thank you." Honestly, I was fine with any hospital where I could receive treatment. Later, with the referral letter from the female doctor, I headed to the general hospital. There, I underwent a series of similar tests. This time, in addition to the previous tests, I also had an electrocardiogram and lung examination. They needed to check if my body was fit enough for surgery. After all the tests, I was called into the consultation room for the last time. "About the test results, would you like me to disclose everything? If you prefer, I can tell you only part of the information." I wondered if something serious was discovered. The doctor deliberately asked me this. "Yes, please don't hide anything. Tell me everything." "Understood. Then, I would like to discuss the details of your illness and treatment. Plan based on the test results at a later date. Please come with your family next time." The doctor spoke quietly. "Yes, I understand. Thank you." I nodded as I answered, thinking I needed to convey this reality to Dylan and my parents. A few days later, when Dylan finally came home, I told him about the examination and the visit to the doctor. Eh? Do I have to go to the hospital too? I'm really busy with work now. It's impossible, isn't it? Can't your parents go alone just to hear the story? Despite the gravity of the situation, this was his response. I want to scream at Dylan, asking if he doesn't care what happens to me. Please, don't be so cold. I want you to come to the hospital with me to hear about the detailed results and treatment plan. I said this, holding back tears, with a trembling voice. All right, I got it. I'll try to make some time. Dylan looked at me and finally agreed, albeit reluctantly. The next day, I went to the cafe where my parents were and asked them to accompany me to the doctor. I had already told them about the diagnosis, but when they heard my request, they looked surprised and anxious. Allison, so, what about it? You can get better with treatment, right? My mother was teary-eyed. I couldn't answer her question. I didn't know either. I hadn't heard any details about the treatment yet and needed an explanation from the doctor. Wrapped in tension and stress, the day arrived. I reached the hospital early with my parents, but Dylan was nowhere to be seen. We waited a bit, but there was no sign of Dylan coming. Worried, I called Dylan. Hello? Oh. Was today the hospital day? I'm about to enter an important meeting. Sorry. I was shocked. I had told Dylan in advance that it was today, but had my message not reached him? Allison, what about Dylan? Why isn't he here? Seeing my shock, my father asked worriedly. Dylan suddenly got some urgent work. It seems difficult for him to come here. I forced a smile to not worry my parents, even though I could feel my face contorting. But that was all I could say. And then, I was told the test results, breast cancer. There was a part of me that expected it. But hearing the doctor say cancer weighed heavily on my heart. On the way back from the hospital, my steps felt as heavy as if I was wearing lead. Hey, Dylan. I went to the hospital today and got the results. I have breast cancer. When Dylan came home, I shared the results with him. Oh, really? That's tough. His response was surprisingly nonchalant, considering the gravity of the news. Why? It's inconceivable to react like this when your wife has been diagnosed with a serious illness like breast cancer. And they explained the treatment options. I'm scheduled for surgery the week after next. I think they're going to remove my left breast. I tried to suppress my desire to cry out loud and told Dylan in a trembling voice. But it's breast cancer, right? If it's for treatment, isn't it inevitable that your left breast will be removed? In stark contrast to my effort to hold back tears, Dylan responded lightly. What? Is that all you can think of? Don't you care at all that I'm going through such a difficult time? Unable to tolerate Dylan's attitude, I raised my voice in tears. Dylan quickly went to the bedroom, locked himself in, and I couldn't enter. From that day on, I never saw Dylan again. Every day, I was overwhelmed with sadness about my illness and Dylan's indifference. Crying until my eyelids swelled. On the day of my hospital admission, my parents accompanied me. Even on such a significant day, Dylan never showed up. This thought made me feel even sadder. Then, the day before the surgery, Dylan, whom I hadn't seen since that day, visited my hospital room. I thought he might have finally come to show concern, but the words he spoke were unbelievable. Allison, after the treatment and when you're discharged, go back to your parents' house, not mine. Because, after the surgery, you might lose your left breast, right? I don't want a woman without a breast. I can't see such a woman as a woman. How could he say such heartless things to his wife who was about to undergo surgery? What's that supposed to mean? Aren't we supposed to support each other and get through this together as a couple? I appealed to him with tears in my eyes, but Dylan left the room without saying a word. Being confronted with such words just before surgery only deepened the wounds in my heart. Still, surprisingly, a strong determination began to grow within me. I can't let such a man beat me down. I felt a resolve to fight and overcome the disease. The next morning, on the day of the surgery, I told my parents about what Dylan had said the day before. What? Dylan said such terrible things? Forget about him. You should cut ties with such a man. Hearing this, my father was furious, raising his voice in anger. That's right, Allison. To think that your own husband would neglect you in such a difficult time. And to say such heartless things, claiming he doesn't need a woman like that. I never thought Dylan could be so cold. My mother expressed her anger and disappointment in Dylan. Yes. But Dad, Mom, right now, just pray for the success of my surgery. I won't let this disease beat me. With those words, I headed for the operating room. After the surgery, when I woke up from anesthesia, I found myself in the intensive care unit. I was still under the influence of anesthesia, connected to monitors until my condition stabilized. According to the doctor, the cancer hadn't spread as much as anticipated. So a complete removal of my left breast wasn't necessary. I felt a slight relief that my breast was still there. If the wound heals well, I would be able to leave the hospital in about half a month and continue recuperating at home. However, a week after the surgery, shortly after being moved to the general ward, I received a frantic call from my mother. My father had collapsed and was rushed to the hospital in an ambulance. He had suffered a heart attack and it was already too late when he arrived at the hospital. Resuscitation attempts were unsuccessful. Just as I was preparing for discharge after a successful surgery, this tragedy occurred. No one around us had anticipated this. Being hospitalized, I couldn't move, so my mother and relatives somehow managed the funeral. Still, I couldn't get in touch with Dylan. Out of frustration, I called his company, only to be told that Dylan was on an overseas business trip and wouldn't be back for a while. I requested the company to somehow get a message to Dylan about my father's death, emphasizing that I needed to hear from him. I felt helpless, knowing how much my father had been worried about me, especially in such a situation. After being discharged, I returned to my parents' house. Not because Dylan told me to, but because I needed to discuss my father's estate with my mother. While discussing this, I received a call from Dylan. Hello, Allison? Congratulations on your discharge. I heard about your dad. My condolences. So, I have something to talk about. Can you come over here? Even though my father was his father-in-law, Dylan's voice was cheerfully unconcerned. Despite the fact that my father had just passed away. It almost felt as though he had been eagerly waiting for my father's death. All right, Dylan. Is next Sunday okay? I replied as calmly as possible, suppressing my anger. Next Sunday? Yeah, that's fine. I'll be waiting. Dylan responded cheerfully and quickly ended the call. Mom, who owns the land and house where we live now? I suddenly asked my mother. Your house and land? Let me think. Yes, they're in your father's name. The house, too. Why do you ask? My mother answered, tilting her head in curiosity. Can you get the documents for that property ready by next Sunday? As my mother arranged the documents on the table, she responded. Ready? All the documents for your father's properties are already here. Then, on Sunday, I set out to execute my decision. I signed the divorce papers and took the house registration documents with me as promised. When I arrived at the house, not only was Dylan there, but also a young woman. She wore bold makeup, but her face still held a youthful appearance. It was clear that Dylan had chosen her, a much younger woman, over me, which made me feel a mix of anger and complexity. Welcome. Come on in. Oh, this is still your house, too, right? Dylan greeted me, showing no remorse for having another woman present, smirking confidently. Yes. Is this what you wanted to talk about? I said that and thrust the divorce papers I had brought with me towards Dylan. Oh? Impressive. You caught on fast. This makes things easier. Let's wrap this up quickly. Saying this, Dylan took the divorce papers without hesitation, quickly signed his name and handed them back to me. The woman next to him remained silent throughout, just staring at us. Man, your dad dying was just perfect timing. Now this house is all mine. He said this while looking around with a pleased expression. Huh? What do you mean? Why would this house be yours? I exaggerated my reaction, almost mockingly. Then, I laid out the documents on the living room table and showed them to Dylan. Hey, where do you see your name on the title of this land and house? This house has always been in my father's name. You think it's yours? Are you stupid? I exclaimed, barely concealing my incredulity. What? This house was a gift from your father to us, right? That's why I took your surname, so I should be the heir to the inheritance, right? Dylan said this seriously as if he truly believed he was in the right. Was he really that naive? It would be absurd if he was. Hey, did you ever legally become my father's adopted son when we got married? That never happened, right? And you don't own this house either. Ever signed any documents? No, right? So, the inheritance rights to my father's estate belong only to my mother and me. You don't have any rights to it. I stated this emphatically. You're just my spouse. That means you have no relation to my father's inheritance. Hearing this, Dylan suddenly became flustered and stammered, Eh? What do I do now? Hey. What's this? This is not what you told me. You said you had a house. And you were kicking out your wife, so I agreed to date you. You're so pathetic. The woman, sitting beside Dylan, started to rage upon hearing this. Oh well, now that the divorce papers are signed, once they're submitted to the office, you and I will be strangers. What you do after that is up to you. But this house will eventually be inherited by me. You can't stay here forever. What will you do? I said this, fluttering the divorce papers in my hand. Dylan looked disappointed and collapsed to his knees. Oh, if you two really want to continue living in this house, I could sell it to you. But you know, the land prices around here have gone up quite a bit. Combined with the house, it might cost a lot. I continued with a slight smile. Dylan then showed interest, asking, Really? You'll sell it? How much? Yes, that's right. Just buy it. Let's buy it. The woman chimed in, egging Dylan on. Well, right now, the house and land might be around $1 million? I exaggerated a bit, but the value of land in this area has increased compared to before. Considering the combined value of the house and land, it could amount to that much. What? $1 million? Hey. There's no way we can pay that kind of money. Are you kidding us? Exactly. That's way too expensive. That's a ripoff. Hearing the price, the two of them were incredulous, raising a ruckus. Well, if you think my price is too high, why don't you consult a real estate appraiser? But I think you'll find it's not as cheap as you hope. After surgery, I felt a newfound confidence within me. I was surprised at myself for standing up so boldly. considering how introverted and timid I used to be. Yes, people can change if they have a strong enough will. But really, Dylan? Did you actually think that by taking my last name, my father's assets would automatically become yours? How foolish can you be? Didn't you know that's not how it works? I said this, laughing at Dylan's ignorance and misunderstanding. Allison, I'm sorry. I apologize. It was all a joke, this divorce thing. It was just for fun, you know, just messing around with her. Please don't take it seriously, I beg you. Dylan suddenly started to fawn over me, trying to appease me. That's terrible. What do you mean? You said you were going to marry me. You said we'd live together in this house after divorcing your wife. Was all that you told me a lie? The woman became furious, her eyes narrowing as she raised her voice at Dylan. What's this? You're not divorcing your wife, and this house isn't even Dylan's? That's totally different from what you said. What's going on here? The woman's anger reached its peak, her face turning red with fury. By the way, Dylan, didn't you say you're not interested in a woman without breasts? Why don't you live with her then? Sounds like a good match, don't you think? Oh, and I'll give you a week to think about it. If you decide to leave this house, please do so quickly. If you leave anything behind, I'll dispose of it, just so you know. I said this with a smile, then confidently left the house. After I left, I could hear loud arguments and the sound of something breaking inside the house. But that was no longer my concern. If anything was broken, I would make sure to send them a bill later. With these thoughts, I went to submit the divorce papers at the municipal office. I felt no hesitation in finalizing the divorce. I considered claiming compensation with the evidence of his infidelity. But the thought of having any more dealings with him was repulsive to me. I regretted not gaining more social experience during my time holed up in the university lab. Maybe if I had, I wouldn't have fallen for a superficial man like Dylan. Despite the risk of breast cancer recurrence, I am determined not to lose. I'm still in my 20s. There's still so much life ahead of me. Later, I found out that the woman who was with Dylan, now my ex-husband, was a junior colleague from our company. They had worked together in the same product planning team. And their relationship developed as they spent time together during overtime and business trips. I heard this story when I unexpectedly met a former colleague. However, their affair became known to the company's upper management. Eventually, both were removed from the team and transferred to different departments. The woman became the subject of office gossip and couldn't bear it, leading to her resignation. As for Dylan, he ended up managing inventory at a warehouse for imported goods near the harbor. I heard he spends his days checking stock in the warehouse. Technically, it was a promotion in terms of position, but in reality, it was more of a demotion. It seemed the company was treating him like an unwanted element. Once a promising young employee, he ended up in a pitiful state. I inherited my father's estate with my mother. Since the value of the land had increased, paying the inheritance tax was challenging. We decided to use some of the land for in-kind tax payment and kept the rest. With the income from the remaining real estate combined with the earnings from the cafe my mother runs, we could cover her living expenses. I took over the house I lived in with Dylan and decided to open a tutoring school there. Having been good at mathematics, I decided to teach children who struggle with it. From elementary to high school students. I hope to convey the joy of math to them. And if even one of them comes to enjoy it, that would be great. I also resumed writing the thesis I was working on during my graduate studies. In the future, I plan to return to graduate school and continue my research. My life is still long. I intend to keep evolving without giving up.